Hello. Um, my name is Jonna Peterson. I am going to serve as the moderator for One Size Does Not Fit All, Perspectives from Large, Medium, and Small Services, so systematic review services. I will do a brief introduction of myself, but first I want to cover today's agenda. If at any point the slides are not doing what I think they're doing, if somebody on this would give me a holler, that would be fantastic. So here's today's agenda. So we're going to talk just a little bit about our qualifications and backgrounds and the reason why you're listening to the four of us today. Then we'll have a little bit of discussion. So we've got four predetermined questions that we'll answer sort of live on the fly. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. So this is our plan, and we're going to ask that everybody, if you do have questions, to type them into the chat, correct?
The Q&A.
The Q&A, thank you. See, there's a reason there's more than just me on this. So let's go ahead and jump in and do some introductions. So housekeeping. Everybody's muted and will remain muted through the session. There it is. I should have waited for my own slide. Please enter your questions into the Q&A, and you can also submit them anonymously. So if you have that burning question that you don't want to be identified by, I will go ahead and monitor the questions in the Q&A, and then we'll try to get to as many of those as we can at the end. And let's start with some introductions. So as I said, I'm Jonna Peterson. I'm the interim director at Loyola University Chicago's Health Sciences Library. I have been here at Loyola for about 3 years, but have been in health sciences libraries for a little more than 20 now, always in a public services role, including systematic review work. I've been a clinical librarian and I did a whole bunch of education. So I've been around a long time. I'm going to let my colleagues on this panel introduce themselves as well. So Shanita, why don't you go first? We are not related, by the way, with the both last name.
Unfortunately, yes.
No.
Hi, so I'm Shanita Peterson. I am the Systematic Review Coordinator and Public Health Informationist at the Woodruff Health Sciences Center Library at Emory University, which is located in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been at my library for over 12 years, and I'll be on the call to provide some ATL represent. I'll be on the call to provide some insights on large scale evidence synthesis projects or services, not projects, but also those. Yes.
Thanks, Shanita. Let me advance the slide here. Elizabeth, go ahead and tell us about you.
My name is Elizabeth Huggins. I actually work with Jonna at Loyola University Chicago. She's my boss, but we thought she would be great, a moderator here because she's been working in evidence synthesis for a long time. I've been at Loyola for over a decade now, which is very exciting and also a little strange, but you know, it's nice to be at one place. We're a much smaller scale service and a smaller university. I think altogether we're running like somewhere between like 13 and 15,000, including graduate students and the medical school, et cetera. But I've been doing work and development of evidence synthesis skills for like the last almost 10 years, not quite. I started around the time I started at Loyola. But I'm here to provide the insight into what it looks like to have a smaller, mid-sized type of service that isn't sort of connected with a really large R1 significant research output situation.
Perfect. Thanks, Elizabeth. And let me get Jen's slide. Hold on. It seems like I have to click everything twice. There, Jen, go ahead.
Thanks, Jonna. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jen Bonet. I am currently a proposal development associate for special projects. It's a mouthful. I'm still wrapping my head around it. In the research development office at the University of Maine. So basically I help people write strategically for competitive external grants, but I'm a librarian by training, first at the University of Michigan, and then I was at the University of Maine as a social sciences and nursing librarian for about 10 years until I moved into this new position this past fall. And I've been dabbling in evidence synthesis for a couple of years. I'm the newest in this group and have been on like 2 so far. So glad to be here.
2 is an awesome place to
Yeah.
start.
And I was going to say, we're really excited to have Jen with us because Jen provides like ad hoc services, which is really different from what Shanita and I do. So we're super thrilled that she was able to join us to provide that unique perspective.
All right. I am going to jump into the first of our 4 sort of pre-planned questions. And then after I read the question, I'll let one of our panelists and give their perspective, and then we'll sort of monitor the Q&A and any chat comments that come in. Okay, so here is our first question. So to my panelists, Shanita, I'm going to start with you for this one. Tell us about your department's evidence synthesis service and the institution that you serve.
Yeah, I'm getting a phone call right now. That's just, isn't that how it works? So Emory University is our one institution. So there's Emory University, and then there's also Emory Healthcare. So our library serves the members of the Woodruff Health Sciences Center. So that includes a School of Medicine, a School of Nursing, a School of Public Health, and then also Emory Healthcare, and some other smaller units. And so for us, we have been doing almost like ad hoc systematic review work for quite a while, ever since I've been at Emory. But in 2019, we actually established our formalized service. So right now, currently, we have 6 members on our team. And so we offer 2 tiers of service, which is a consultation model. And with the consultation model, our expectations is that the informationist who is working on that would receive an acknowledgement in the manuscript. And so then the second tier is a co-authorship tier. So with that, obviously, we would expect co-authorship, and it is much more involved. We're an actual team member. We go to the meetings. We do all the translations. We write the methods. We also have covenants. We manage all the citations throughout the life of the project. So I guess one other thing that we'll discuss is sort of like some parameters we put on our service to sort of keep everything manageable. But I guess one of the bigger things is that we serve research groups from Emory University and not necessarily Emory Healthcare, but there's some overlap with that, as you can imagine, with the faculty. But yeah.
Thanks, Shanita. Elizabeth?
Okay, so as I mentioned, sort of we're a smaller institution. Loyola University Chicago is located in Chicago. We actually have 3 campuses. John and I are not located at the really beautiful one that everyone recognizes, which is like right on the lake. We're actually west of the city, which is where our medical school, our graduate nursing school, and a number of other graduate programs. We also have an MPH program, and we work with dietetics and biomedical science graduates, et cetera. Unlike Emory, which I think is really interesting here, is that we also serve a 550 teaching hospital, 550 bed teaching hospital, and the residents and fellows there, because they work really closely with our faculty in the School of Medicine, as well as our medical students, often who are rotating. So we have sort of an interesting size. Our evidence synthesis service, our formalized one, is fairly new. Jonna and I launched it in 2022. So it's just hit its two-year anniversary of being a formalized service. We do a lot of the same things that Shanita mentioned, but I think in some ways we're a little bit more flexible. So for example, one of the things that we offer that I've talked to other groups that are larger that don't always include is we help with full text retrieval. We'll talk a little bit later about like some of the tools we do to manage that. I do a little bit more, I think, of the project management hands-on pieces, particularly with new teams, than I think some other groups have done. We also have covenants, but that that was a tiered process. We started with Rayon and then graduated up to Covidence as our demand grew. But there is a ton of things we don't do. We don't do data extraction. We don't screen citations for the teams. And we try to move them to the groups on campus who are appropriate for that. So I think that we're pretty happy with our service. And I will say, I did talk about this in MLA, but we had a pretty big jump in the number of the demand from when we started in 2022 to 2023. We actually doubled the number of requests in that time period. So I think we're running somewhere between like 20 and 25 active reviews right now. We have a couple of zombie ones, but we're doing pretty well.
Right. Maybe, and then sometimes the zombies come at just the
Yeah.
right time too. Anyway, Jen, let's hear it.
Thanks. So as I mentioned, I'm at the University of Maine. We are kind of a mid-sized R1 flagship university in an 8-campus public university system across the state. We have about 11,000 total. I looked it up after this team chatted the other day. It's actually about 11,000 total of undergraduate and graduate enrollment. And we're situated in the homeland of the Wabanaki Nations. So that's where we are up here in the Northeast. Our service, as Elizabeth mentioned, is ad hoc. It's not coordinated on campus. It's more informal. And in the library, it's within kind of a subject liaison model of research services, so that my colleagues over there do some evidence synthesis work with their faculty upon request. And it also depends on their time and capacity. And that was the case when I was there too. I was lucky enough when I was there in my role to start to grow an ad hoc service, as maybe unintuitive as that sounds. It was from a personal interest in developing and practicing evidence synthesis skills, but also to meet kind of an increasing demand for evidence synthesis support, not only in nursing, which is where I was working, and some of the other allied health professions where we typically see interest, but also a growing need in the social sciences. Now I work in research development, where again, we help folks write competitive external grants, and that's to fund kind of the wide-ranging creative and scholarly activities that take place on campus and throughout our state. And I'm, again, fortunate enough to still get to assist with some evidence synthesis work, but now it fits into a research development lens, and this kind of service is kind of offered in a more distributed way in multiple places on our campus. But I think it makes a lot of sense in our department to support it in any way we can, including supporting our libraries in the ways that they work with faculty, because so much of what evidence synthesis does can help drive and provide an evidence base for the grant proposals we submit. It's interesting because Shanita and Elizabeth talked about some of the resources that they use and the support they provide. So I can say that we have no dedicated resources. So we use free tools wherever possible, like Rayon that was already mentioned, and we provide support. Basically, the rule of thumb is depending on the extent to which you feel you are available and have the capacity to do so. So like I've helped folks at the consultation level only, but I've also assisted with protocol development, search strategy design, full text download, like Shanita writing some of the methods and co-authoring. But it all depends on what people feel comfortable with and where else they're kind of tapping into services on and off campus.
Jen, you're kind of like the evidence synthesis ambassador to your university.
Love it.
That's kind of great. Okay, let's move on to the second question, because I just want to be aware, keep our time in mind. So, all right, gang, in your experience, what is the biggest advantage associated with your department size when conducting evidence synthesis projects? And what is the biggest challenge? And I'm going to go in reverse order this time. So Jen, you're going to get to talk again first.
Okay. I would say because, and Elizabeth and I have joked about this because I think she thinks of Loyola as small and I think of UMaine as small because I was at University of Michigan before, so you go from 40-something thousand to 10,000+ undergrads. But we are in a small rural town in Orono, Maine. And so they're like 10,000 people total in our town. And so in addition to college students. So if you don't know each other on campus, you do from living in a small place. So if you're a parent, you run into each other at school or at T-ball. If you're at the local coffee shop or taking public transit or going to the grocery, it is inevitable that you'll run into people from the university or from town who may have connections that are valuable and insightful for the kinds of work that we all might be doing. And it's fairly easy to get to know people and build relationships. And I think that comes in handy with evidence synthesis when thinking about building a team or connecting people with various resources, including their librarians who can help with these types of projects. And it's that interpersonal part of evidence synthesis that I've always found interesting and that I think is really facilitated by the size of our institution and the size of our town, really. Because it kind of sets up an implicit team approach to learning this process together and kind of working in tandem. I would say when we think about what's the biggest challenge, one of them is probably scaling. As I had mentioned, we provide kind of informal services distributed in a non-systematic way. So there are people, especially faculty, who kind of do some of this work in their disciplines and maybe don't seek out support. We have the library doing some stuff. We have folks in our office doing a little bit. And there's this growing interest, but limited staff and budget. So all of that, I'm sure plenty of people deal with, and it kind of creates a challenge as to where do we go from here. On the positive side, there's a new library dean at our campus, and that in my mind means there's potential for kind of envisioning a future for evidence synthesis as something more foundational to the research support that our campus provides, and hopefully a collaborative future that can help with scale and help with kind of cohering or bringing people together from various units to support our researchers.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Elizabeth?
So yeah, picking up on Jen's point. So when we were practicing this, we realized that the University of Maine where she works and Loyola where I work are similar sizes when it comes to like undergraduate and graduate population-ish. But University of Maine is an R1, which basically refers to the research output, and Loyola is an R2. But unlike the University of Maine that does have this like small community that's associated, Loyola is like the complete opposite. We're in Chicago, which is a very large city. We have 3 campuses that are spread out across the Chicago and the suburbs. There's actually more, but we won't go into that. And the health sciences library is only recently sort of built like a much more close relationship with our undergraduate and other non-health sciences graduate libraries. But it's interesting because all of those features come with their own advantages and disadvantages. But when I was thinking about this question, I actually realized that the advantage as well as the challenge for our evidence synthesis service here at HSL is the one and the same, which is our teeny tiny size. So Jonna and I are almost half of our current library. We have 5 staff members, including her and I. So that means that it becomes like a lot of these larger projects almost becomes like a whole library project, which on the one hand is a real big advantage because we're really flexible, we're highly adaptable, like we don't have a lot of red tape or bureaucratic processes that we have to go through. I saw in some other sessions, people were talking about, convincing administrators and things that they need to implement. John and I sit down and say, well, what do we think would work best? Or how can we change this? And then we just sort of do it because it's just she and I. And we've worked with our colleagues in acquisitions and access services and our interlibrary loan folks to sort of streamline some of these processes to bring in the technology and the tools to make some of the pieces that providing the service more onerous a lot easier. So for example, we're able to provide those full text retrieval, which a lot of services from people I've talked to aren't able to do that because it's a really heavy time burden, which I totally get, but our great people in ILL and access services, which overlap, have been able to come up with a script, a Python script, to work with a number of tools that we have access to, both through some fairly reasonable subscriptions and also free, to make that process so they can pull full text in like a day or two, rather than the days or weeks that it often takes to do by hand. So that's a great way for us to be able to like promote our service to provide this. I've also discovered that I try to get my teams to understand the process and really commit to it before we go through. So I require them to have a protocol. You know, that was like, I sort of went and Jonna said, I think everyone has to do protocols. And we're like, okay, so now we do protocols. Because I noticed that the teams that created protocols were way more likely to go through the project, and we ended up with fewer zombie reviews, as they would be said. And then like I encouraged them to publish in journals and OSF and things like that as a way to add to that piece and share with the scholarship. It's also our big challenge because it's only 2 of us, and I'll talk more about this in a bit. Like the workload can be really concerning and overwhelming. I'll dig into this, but neither of us are systematic review librarians. It's a subset of our job. So it's really important that we think about how the project management works, how we share the load, and that we communicate really clearly with the teams that come to us, and so that they also understand that this is just part of what we do. And as you know, it is so important to remember these days, an emergency on their part does not constitute an emergency on mine. So it's just important to communicate like thoughtfully and kindly and considerately with the team, so that they realize that like, hey, I am a member of your team. You're coming to me because I have the expertise you need. So we got to work with this together. And I'm sorry I can't do it like right now when you need it, but maybe we can negotiate something. And so far that's been really successful. So I think that's how we manage sort of that double-edged sword of our small size.
Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Shanita.
Awesome. So we don't require protocols, but we do have a request form that everyone sort of has to start off with. So even if you work with us many, many times, and most of the people who do, they know that that's part of the process, and that almost is. And we've set up the request form to mirror a protocol. So we have lots of guiding questions, things that we don't actually need to know, but things that we want research teams to think about. So as far as the question goes, I think one of the, I'll start with the challenges and go to the actual advantages. So as you can imagine, I think someone in the chat said like we all have problems with scaling, and even with the 6 of us, we also have the same problem. So I would say that the demand outpaced the actual supply of talent that we have on the team, and this is a you know, unending, infinite problem that I think we'll always have. I think related to that, that might be a little bit different for a smaller team versus a larger team, is that then creates some inconsistencies of the product that we're offering. And so one of the things that I've done is actually do a lot to try to put some quality control on what we are offering. So one of the projects that we worked on in the past year is to actually create some internal search hedges that we all use. So something like if a researcher comes and they're interested in working with or searching for children, right, 0 through 18, we don't actually need to all do that all the time, right? So what we did is we set up a project where all 6 of us went into subgroups, and we, came up with a list of search hedges that we felt like were coming up very commonly, and we created those. So I'm actually going to put in the chat a link to the LibGuide that we house those. So that's something that we've also done. We also have lots of different internal workflow documentation. We also use Microsoft planning to go through each of our searches, so the whole team can see that. So if anyone leaves, we also are able to sort of pick up where people left off. As far as advantages, I would say that because we're a larger team, we can offer 2 tiers of service. And really, I think what we can offer that might be limited for other teams is we can offer co-authorship. So this is something that benefits not only the obvious research teams, but it also benefits us informationists. So at Emory, librarians are considered faculty equivalent. So we have a ranking system. We are on continuous appointments. And so scholarly products are also part of our expectations of our job. So because we have this sort of built-in co-authorship that's ongoing, we really don't have that pressing need to publish that I feel like sometimes librarians do. And the other thing is sort of like my job. We also have the ability to designate someone as the coordinator of the service. So there's some benefits to that, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But I know we have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to leave it right there.
Thank you. Yeah, the questions, keep voting. We're going to have the panelists do one more, and then we're going to kick it over to your questions. So let me go to question number 3. So what was a challenge that your department faced in cultivating and maintaining a sustainable evidence synthesis practice, and how did your department address it? Shanita, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we have a lot of sort of like internal workflow standardizations. The other thing that we also do, and I know that this was a question that kind of came up, is that we over the years have tightened up the eligibility of the service quite a lot. And what I mean by that is who actually who will we provide the service for? So one of the things that has come up is that we only offer our service. First of all, you have to have a team. You can't be a solo practitioner. You have to then also be currently, well, it says you have to be a doctoral level student at least, right? Emory University so the PI, the team lead, needs to be a doctoral level student. And so our idea is that would be sort of PhD level. So there was a question around student groups. So we do not offer the service for student groups. And we've actually been having a conversation about, do we actually need to remove even PhD level students? Because there's sort of a question about what you're supposed to be doing academically versus like a research product. But I know that there's like a lot of wiggle room. So that's something that we're discussing internally. And one of the other big things I think we did is that we created a wait list. And that's sort of something that we put into place when we had a unexpected change in staff. And that was in 2022, and we've kept it in place, and we will be keeping it in place. And I think Elizabeth talked about that, is that establishing an expectation of like urgency and sort of like pulling back on that. So we lead with that there is a waiting list. And I think if somebody comes in that needs something, I think it just like puts them on breaks. And most of the time we will tell them, like, you can work on the protocol, you can work on the data extraction, like you can start to train your students. Like there are things that you can be doing, or the research team can be doing while they're waiting for the service. And I also think that has helped with the weeding out process as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of a waiting list.
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
Yeah. So this is helpful because then I get to sort of follow up on that, because it's not quite as rigid or like clear cut, maybe is a better word, as what Shanita is doing at Emory. But I think Jonna and I sort of use some similar approaches to sort of manage the flow. So there's been some questions in there, and because I'm infinitely curious, I'm always checking the Q&A. But one of the things that we've been doing, like with the protocols, is we don't necessarily have a wait list, but working on the protocol and bringing that with you to those meetings is really critical. So what I've been doing is like they have to meet with us if they want to do a systematic review, and we talk about it, and then basically we send them home with homework and they have to come back with the homework finished before we move forward, which is part of how we handle what I think Shanita calls it demand, which I think makes a lot of sense there. But I realized after our conversation earlier this week, because we practiced a couple times, that this is more like workload for us. And I think the workload is also a part that really can be intimidating and feel really overwhelming, particularly when you feel like you're so small you can't handle it. But as Shanita has pointed out, and I've heard from other librarians in similar positions with whole departments, it doesn't matter how big your service is, the demand increases and the workload increases. So some of the ways that we've come to manage that, because again, I think that's the big challenge here. It's sort of the big, threat's the wrong word, but the big like concern is that you have someone to talk to. So like, I'm really lucky and I work with Jana and she's a great mentor. And so she always reminds me that workload for systematic reviews and evidence synthesis is really like a wave, it ebbs and flows. So when I keep that in mind, I also realize that sometimes like, systematic review folks are going to have to wait if I'm prepping for teaching, because guess what? I do that too. And communicating that is really important. I also learned during COVID how to say no really well because we had 3 people at one point. So I had to say no to many things, not just systematic reviews. That's a different piece, but that sort of like, okay, we have to manage those expectations piece. We have also worked on sort of simplifying or streamlining some of those processes. The review article is a good, the full text retrieval is a good example of that. The protocol is a good example of that. And I want to give Jen a chance to talk. So like, I'll go into it a little bit later about the Q&A because there was a specific question about that. And I'm happy to talk about that. But, I actually pulled on a lot of my previous experience because I started as essentially an instruction librarian and then worked my way into doing more heavy-duty research. And as I moved forward in my career, I got better at managing my own expectations about what I should be doing and how I should be involved and where those boundaries are, as well as the expectations of my patrons, of my users. And I apply that now. So for me, bringing that into the world of evidence synthesis has been, I think, one of the greatest ways to address the concerns about workload, because like I have my own boundaries and they have to respect them. And if they don't want to respect them, then we'll just not work together. And that's just the way it goes. But it's taken some time to get there.
I will also add that saying no is something that has inherently come along with my having children.
Yeah.
So my toddlers have taught me to say no very quickly. Jen, go ahead.
I just want to say I appreciate so much the discussion of mentorship, and I think that plays into this question for me, because the question being, how do you cultivate, maintain a sustainable evidence synthesis practice? And that's a really tough question for me, because I feel like the biggest challenge is scope and scope creep, because we don't have something that is dedicated to evidence synthesis. It's really ad hoc, as we've talked about. However, that said, the University of Maine gave me time and, where needed, some funding to participate in systematic review training. So I was able to do the University of Michigan systematic review training. That one I think does cost a nominal fee. And then I think in Minnesota was free, the Evidence Synthesis Institute. So I got to do these intensive trainings where I met some amazing people. That's where I first met Elizabeth. And so much of what I do now is because I was able to lean on like the MedLib community, the Evidence Synthesis Institute community, and people like Elizabeth, who so graciously and generously provided their time to help me grow my understanding of the work I was doing and to give me feedback on things that I was doing. So I think that's been very helpful, being able to advocate for, hey, these are things we need if we want to do, provide these services, even if it's not a full-blown well-defined service, but something that we want to do for our faculty where possible. And what was the other? Was there anything else I was going to mention? Yeah, that was the main thing there, is that I think we can think broadly about what colleagues are, and colleagues don't necessarily have to be intra-institutional. They can be across all these places, which helps me a lot, being in, again, what I call a small place. tagging on to Shanita and Elizabeth talking about the question that came up about working with students. In fact, the 2 systematic reviews that I have done were with PhD students, but through talking with folks, including Elizabeth, it was made clear to me that setting some expectations would be important. And so we did that. You know, we would first talk about the protocol and I would give them homework because Elizabeth told me to give them homework.
I did. I told her to give her homework.
and you know, I expected to meet with the student and her advisor and the team, because again, this is a mentoring relationship. I mean, I'm definitely learning and being mentored, but I'm also helping to mentor this student, and that advisor is helping to mentor that student, you know, and that student is helping us understand, you know, all of the content expertise she brings to bear. So it's a great learning experience, and it, you know, requires some attention when working with students to what kind of growth they're going through and how we can contribute to it. So I understandably, in Shanita's case, she's got so much demand that they have to kind of slice and dice things. I don't have that situation. I was like, yes, I finally get to try this out. And then we're learning together and everybody's excited to learn together. And nobody's like, why don't you know anything yet?
I love it. We're always,
yeah.
I often compare us to the coach. We're like
Yeah.
the systematic review coach.
Yeah.
And then, you know, for the students particularly that are going
Yeah.
through the project, they aren't aware. Okay. All right, gang. I want to get us to some of the questions in the Q&A because we're already at 11:35. So again, upvote those questions if you want to move them up the list, but I'm going to start with the one that's at the top right now. It's had the most thumbs. How do you train new librarians with no experience in evidence synthesis at your institutions?
I can go.
Okay.
So one of the things I think we mentioned the University of Michigan. So Elizabeth and I actually met because we went to the Pittsburgh. So that, and that's how her and Jen met, going to the University of Michigan. So we will send.
I just want to pause to remind everyone that we also met partly because I fell down the hill at Pittsburgh while we were going to lunch.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but
she helped me back up stuff, which was really nice of her. Anyway, continue on, Shanita.
So we will try to have, and we have seen that the MLA has the systematic review. I forgot what it's called, but it's like SCSS. But we haven't had any of our new librarians do that. But one of the things we do internally is that we have a shadow program. And what we do is before you can sort of become an official member, and this is honestly for everyone, it doesn't matter if you have systematic review service, because again, we have a certain workflow and we just want everybody to sort of like be on the same accord. So what happens is that the new librarian who is interested in becoming a team member, they will actually shadow someone throughout a whole systematic review. So even if it becomes a zombie review, we want them to go through the whole process. So that usually takes a year. So we haven't brought anyone in specifically to sort of work on systematic reviews. And again, we don't have the expectation is that someone will hit the ground running with the team. So that's what we do.
We haven't actually had a chance to train.
I was going to say,
we
don't have anybody new to train at Loyola.
We hope
so
one day.
Yeah, we hope so. We're crossing our fingers.
Yeah, we really are. We've had a small staff for a while, so we're really hoping that like we'll be able to get it, but that's for another story. But I think Jen can chat with me about this a little bit. So when I met Shanita, as she pointed out, we were at one of the last Pittsburgh workshops, which I did love. And outside of falling down the hill, she did decide that I was a reasonable person. And she had already done more, like she was way more familiar with the systematic review process at that point because of her excellent background in public health and epidemiology. So we chatted a lot, and I have to say I learned a lot from her, even though it was really informal. But now, having gained some more experience, like Jen reached out with some questions and we chatted a little bit about CINAHL because I spend a lot of time searching CINAHL because I also work with nursing faculty and students. But I sort of shared some of my insights with her, which she was really open to, which I appreciate, but also, you know, teaching, which is where I started anyway, is a good way to remember the information that you know, and then think about how to communicate to someone who's new. And now that we're working with sort of non-health sciences librarians at Loyola as we sort of become a bigger group. We're in process. I've gotten some questions from some of my colleagues outside of health sciences, and I basically have started with things that I wish someone had told me when I started, which is like how to learn what an evidence synthesis is and what it means, and what the study designs look like in the area of specialty or expertise or discipline that you're working in. I learned a lot about that when I decided to go on down the road of my own MPH. I'm not recommending everyone should do that, but I did see I learned a lot about study design. And then also doing like the training. So I took a lot of webinars. I have taken some of the MLA classes, even though I'm not going to get the specialization. I've been to a couple of different workshops, and I've done a lot of reading. So I'm a big fan of like Grant and Booth. And I went to Margaret Foster's, which someone mentioned earlier in the conference. So I did a lot of that stuff just to learn. And then I started to like play around with things and apply stuff.
Jen, did you want to jump into this one, or you're with your?
I don't know that I have much to add,
Okay,
because I
it's
would have
fine.
said professional development, and I would, encourage people to go to the Evidence Synthesis Institute and these other
That's totally fine.
places. But I would say, in thinking about, well, what do I wish, had happened? And I had Nancy Curtis was a librarian here, and she has since left UMaine, and she always made herself available and was so generous with her expertise and time. And she's the one who got me excited about evidence synthesis and to learn more, and provided me with resources. So I think even whether you or not you have a dedicated service, if you have people that you think have potential and an interest and you want to provide this type of support, I think it's great to, if you can, give your time, and yeah, that I think is kind of invaluable.
Okay. I'm going to jump to a different question that's in the
Fine.
Q&A. So
While you do that, Jonna, I did just want to know, you picked the question, but
Okay.
I was really excited when I saw this about LESS, specifically for the reason that Jen mentioned. Because it is, unless you go to one of these like really small institutes, and they're small because like the knowledge is heavy and the workload, like teaching it is challenging, particularly to librarians who become the experts. But this is great because like there's so much connection here. Like there are over 1,000 people who have joined across the world, which gives you an opportunity to meet people and talk, and that's half the battle. Like that's just half the process, is to connect with someone who's you're willing to chat with. And I was really lucky because I met Janita and Jen and Jonna, and I have some other people that I've met over the years. And those are the people I go to and I say, so this is a little weird. What do I do about this?
Yeah, I was
Anyways.
like, so this is weird. How can I
Yes,
fix this?
exactly.
Here's another question. So another anonymous question submitted. So if you're a co-author and you attend team meetings, for those that have filled the co-author role, do you only attend the meetings when methods and other general discussions occur? Like, or do you go to every meeting that the team has? This is more like a logistics sort of thing. Like, how do you handle the teams?
So I can go.
Okay.
So it really does depend on the research team. Some of our researchers are working on guidelines from multi-institutional, partners. So there really is no time to go to every single meeting. But we have an expectation that, of course, the meetings that have to do with the search and the things that we're actually actively involved in, we will go to. But some researchers are like, we'll take it from here and we'll reach back out in 6 months. And then some of them will just like include you on the team. So it really is up to the research team how involved we are day to day, or like, meeting to meeting in the process.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just going to say, because my experience has been with two PhD students who are learning this process from ground up, and I'm usually the one like pulling on their sleeve. Can we meet? Should we meet again? Shall we talk about this thing? I have to check in about would you use this terminology? Does this make sense? And I think it's more of a heavy lift, and always at the beginning and through the search strategy development and through until they start screening. So I usually and am initiating and attending those types of meetings, and then pull back once they start screening, and then come back in once they're ready to talk about interpretation and writing methods. And then my mom was a copy editor for 30 years. So then once they've written it, they're like, could you also? And so we kind of look through it together and make sure it makes sense and reads well and that sort of thing. So I'm pretty involved, but again, only done two. One we've published and one is on its way currently. So minimal experience to draw from.
And I think this is good because I'm sort of like in the middle. So it depends on the team. I will be totally honest, I am not a good copy editor, so I do not do that. I really wish that Jen would like sit on my shoulder, because as Jonna can attest, sometimes I miss like propositions in my emails. Anyway, I'm very human. I make a lot of mistakes, but it really depends on the team. So I've worked with some teams who are really like on top of things, or they've done it before and they're used to the process and they don't really need much. And we just sort of meet to chat about question and terms. Versus I also have teams where like I've got one where they needed a lot of support because they had never done it. Most of them were much further in their careers. I actually have two that were emeritus on the team. So like this is a later time for them to be picking this up. So there was a lot of meetings and sort of what we might consider hand holding. But that's the type of, they had those questions and they were good questions and it was a learning experience for everyone. But now they're writing. And I was like, okay, I've done my part. You know, I've written the methods, I've done the Prisma, it's your turn, go off and flourish. And that's really inspiring, I think, for them too, because like we've walked through the process, we've talked about the Prisma checklist, they can ask me questions, but now like they get to take their expertise and what they've learned and run with it. And I really love that part of it. So for me, it's really dependent on the team and the qualifications of the team. For some reason, I get a lot of the newbie teams, Jonna. It doesn't actually, we don't do that on purpose, but because of that, I do a little bit more, I think, project management stuff on that side because they're learning the process. So they need a little bit of education as well as that support for the actual systematic review. But I look at it really positively because it means that I know that these people will go on to their next role, whether they're residents or students, on to the next with that knowledge. And that's powerful. Like that's bringing knowledge into healthcare that will hopefully move us all forward. That's how I get through the day and sleep at night.
I also think that you get the newbies, it's just maybe I have more gray hair than you. I don't know, maybe they come to me for the more wizened ones.
I get a lot of referrals from other groups
Anyway.
that have worked with it. That's really the part of it.
Awesome. All right, so a couple other just like quick answer ones. Okay, so we have an anonymous person that wanted to know, for those of us who don't do systematic reviews full times, how many reviews are you working on at once? Just ballpark me a number.
3. Like
Elizabeth?
actively. Yeah.
I think I've got 6 at different stages.
I would say I'm like 7 right in there.
Mm-hmm.
Jen?
Currently 1.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we've already talked about the student-led teams. That was, we've already talked a little bit about that one.
I did just want to add a note there while you're doing that, because again, we do it a little bit differently here than Shanita, who's like, we don't do students, and Jen, who's like, yay, students. We don't provide this service for people working on dissertations. I think that what Jen and her students did was great because it was like a collaborative piece, which is great, but students who are doing it at our institution who are doing them as like individual projects, no, because that's not appropriate. But I do work with a lot of medical students who are not like, I actually have a couple of medical students run projects, which are really interesting, and like they're doing the work. So I'm not talking about they're like, they think it's something else. They understood and they're doing the work. But I have a lot of students who are like the go-between. So I make sure that I know who the PI is and they are somewhere on these emails so that they understand. But it's a lot of learning for the students. And they're usually there because they're interested in research because they don't have to do this in medical school. So I look at it in that positive way. But no, and one thing that I will say, we do not do it for assignments or capstones or projects or anything like that. So I will say that's one point.
Okay. Here's another one. I'm gonna just keep going.
Wait, I want to
go
add
ahead.
one
Go
more
ahead,
thing to
Shanita.
that. Yeah, so we have a differentiation between who's the project lead and who is the point of contact. That's also something that we've had to tighten up is we've had some issues where a PI will assign a student to sort of go out and then ultimately they're kind of the lead, you know, they don't actually know what's going on. So we also have some parameters on who can be the project lead or sorry, the point of contact with us as well. And so currently you have to be at least a master's level students because we did have some undergrads that were doing that and it did not work out well. So yeah.
Okay. So how does everyone manage running search updates for scoping reviews or systematic reviews that take a long time? Ooh, like 4 years, 2 to 4 years. Does everyone have a process for that?
I would
Or
like
is it
to
sort of
to
ad
start with
hoc?
that. That would be okay.
Sure. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
So I'm working on a Cochrane review that started before COVID. And I love the PI, like he's a really lovely human being and he is one of my favorite people. But he's also practicing medicine, so it just takes long. So basically, like we started this in 2018 or 2019, and they finally submitted the protocol like last year, 2023 or 2022. I can't remember now. And so I've updated this search multiple times. So basically what happens is with these types of groups, what I do is I create the strategy. And this one is a unique situation because like you can tell the differences between my skills from when I started this to now. So for this one, I did a pretty major overhaul when I actually ran the search for the systematic review, even based on what I did for the protocol, because I updated it a little bit to make the vocabulary more appropriate and find new words. I document all of my strategies now for pretty much everything. So if someone comes back 4 years later and says, I want this updated, I said, great. But because it's been 4 years, I need to check to see if there's been any changes in vocabulary, if there's new mesh, like all of that stuff. So it will take some time. So it took me probably 8 weeks-ish to do that updated search for the Cochrane review because I had to dig everything out. I had to check for new vocabulary. I had to rebuild everything because it had been that long. And I just was like, I said, it's going to take me a while because you have a lot of stuff and you want a lot of sources. And that was part of how I managed that. They're one of the few that have been that long, but I think I will probably have a couple more in that boat, particularly with the ones that are practicing at the same time, because it's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah. Shanita or Jen, anybody want to chime in on that one?
I do something very similar. We were using REDCap to sort of, we would upload our database like search worksheets so that anyone again can look at it, even if someone had left Emory, but we moved out of REDCap, and that's when we started using Planner. So one of the things you can upload files. And so we have a Microsoft Teams. And so because of that, everyone in the team can look at everything that everyone is doing. So there shouldn't be a place where someone can't go back and look at what you've done to sort of pick up the pieces, even if it's years later. So that's what we've done.
great. I am going to pick out another question. Are we till noon? Is it still noon?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So we
I've
have
got
like
7
5
minutes.
minutes.
7 minutes. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so we've already sort of talked about, I'm just picking questions. All right, so I'm gonna go with this one because it's a little bit more open. What is something valuable you've learned about the evidence synthesis workload or process by doing? Like, what is something you started doing this kind of work and then you didn't know it was a thing until you learned it was a thing?
I think the
Go ahead,
teaching,
Shanita. Yep.
yeah, I think it's teaching. I think
Mhm.
there's also a question about like, there are lots of people that think that they can do this, and then you get into you start asking them questions, and that's when honestly the wheels fall off. So I think you should always sort of like come into these consultations with an expectation of they probably don't know everything. Like, you are the expert. I think that's the thing. It's like coming into it, you assume they're the subject matter expert, but you are actually the subject matter expert. And I think that just shift, of perspective has really helped me a lot. Really to be sort of more commanding in meetings. Like, you don't know everything that I know. Like, you need me, and I'm happy to help, but you need me. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
Assume they know nothing coming in.
Yeah. Actually, in that vein, and sort of in a similar vein, which I think, so what I'm going to say is I think this occurs to a lot of librarians, and as I've worked with librarians outside of health sciences, I've also noticed it. We might call it imposter syndrome, but I think that we take the service part of our job sometimes too seriously, and we feel like we're supposed to be a servant, which is not really what we're doing. We are experts in our own right and expertise in the own thing. So like, I bring the expertise in review methodology. And I do say that when I come in, I said, you're coming to me because I have the expertise in the review methodology because I've been studying this for nearly a decade. And I've worked with 25 people on it, or 25 teams, however you want to do it. And when I come in and show them all the things they need to do, and this is where the teaching come in, they recognize that. So for me, it really helped me determine that it reminded me that I'm coming in with expertise of my own. That's not just teaching and resource selection. And those things are all important, but how they then communicate out to an audience who by default does not understand what I do. So it's really helped me really come into my own as I am the expert in this. You want me on your team because I am going to contribute something. And not only are we going to make this, a great piece of research to put out there, but then the people who are leaving this team are going to take skills and move forward, which I think is something that a lot of librarians, particularly who do research and education, feel at the core, right? We want to move our people forward in whatever they're learning or doing. So for me, that was like my big, getting more into evidence synthesis was the big thing that like really hit me on that, as it really helped me come into my own as a librarian and an expert.
I realized how little I knew about searching literature when I started learning about evidence synthesis. And I also think when working with other people, it helped me to kind of demonstrate how what evidence synthesis is based in a research methodology. This is a research methodology like no other literature searching you've ever done before. And I think it's hard for people to wrap their mind around it because scholars are used to writing persuasively and, synthesizing evidence to make a point, but this is very different. And I think it's been exciting and challenging and interesting to find my way into describing that and advocating for that. But I've been so lucky because the people I've worked with are so receptive and excited to have us on board because they feel like what we can bring is only going to enhance and strengthen their work. So we can also tell people that, but it's nice when they feel it too.
Right. 11:58, y'all. I think I'm going to stop us there. Thank you for
Thank you.
those that have attended, and Shanita and Elizabeth and Jen. Thanks
Jonna.
thanks for humoring all my questions. And for the less folks for putting this all together. So this has been a fun hour and a very fast hour, I will say. You all, let me think. Oh, I think I have contact information to show you. Oh, that was our bonus question. We didn't get to it. But that's okay. It doesn't matter. We got to lots of other things that you guys wanted to know. So there's the contact for our 3 panelists. If you contact Elizabeth and you need to get a hold of me, she can tell you how to do that. But these
Yeah,
three are
that's
the
why I'm only up there.
these 3 are the 3 you should talk to. Thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference, and we will see you all around.